Hello everyone, and welcome to your video talking about the square root property. So let's start off with something pretty easy. Let's start off with this problem. X squared equals 16. And you know how to do this problem. If you take the square root of both sides, you get x equals 4. Unfortunately, this is the wrong answer. Yes, you did it wrong, didn't you? You did, because you know what is forgotten here is that x can also equal -4, and that doesn't show up when you did it this way, right? You knew, or you were supposed to know at least, that this is the principal square root sign, and so our answer has to be positive, and so you wrote down a +4, but that doesn't take into account the fact that x could also equal -4, because if you have -4 times -4, you still get +16. So this, unfortunately, is wrong. It's close, but it's not correct. Let's do the problem again, this time correctly. So, same problem. We have x squared equals 16, and when we handle this, we say, okay, I do want to consider negative answers for x, so I'm going to put a plus or minus in front of that square root function. So now I get x equals plus or minus 4, and this is correct. We want plus or minus 4 to be considered. Now you might have noticed that sometimes when you are doing your math work, sometimes the book or the teacher or the worksheet, whatever, just goes with plain old principal square root signs, and sometimes it puts the plus or minus in front of the square root sign, and you might be thinking to yourself, what is the rule exactly? You know, they kind of keep changing their minds. So here's the question, is when do we want only positive answers? And there are a couple of times when we only want positive answers. Here's one time, is if we're dealing with distance. So if we're looking at town A and town B here, that distance is going to have to be a positive number. You cannot have -31 miles between town A and town B, not even if you drive backwards. You have to have a positive number for distance. Another time that you are limited to positive answers is if you are counting stuff. You know, like just regular, ordinary, run-of-the-mill nouns. So like here, pretend like you're doing a word problem, and you are counting the sheep on a farmer's field, right? You cannot have negative sheep. You cannot have -4 sheep. You could have 0 sheep, but that's pretty much as low as you can go, right? So if you are doing a word problem and you are solving for the number of sheep on the field, then it's okay for you just to use the principal square root sign. If, however, you're just doing a beautiful, you know, abstract algebra problem, then you're going to have to consider the negatives, and you're going to have to put a plus or minus in front of your square root sign. I'll give you the last example that I want to talk about today, and that is if you are dealing with time. Usually, if you're dealing with time and it's not some weirdo problem, we can only have positive time, right? Back in the day, when I was a young lass, there was a Superman movie where Superman flew around the Earth in the opposite direction of the orbit so quickly that he reversed the spinning of the globe and time went backwards. As long as you are dealing with a math problem that does not involve Superman and time travel, then you know that time has to be positive, right? We measure in positive numbers, seconds or minutes or hours. We don't say it takes us -3 minutes to get to the store or whatever. So whenever you're dealing with distance or counting stuff, or you're dealing with time, you can just use this positive square root sign. If, however, you are doing anything that requires you to consider a negative number, then you need the plus minus in front. Now, you're probably thinking to yourself, this is all nice that Miss DeLisi is explaining all this, but this does seem a little easy. I mean, come on, it's chapter 9 for Pete's sake, right? We expect it to be a little bit harder than this. So I will give you one that's a little bit harder. Let's say that we have this problem. We have x plus 13 squared equals 507. And I tell you, young algebra student, go forth and solve yon problem. And you would say, no problem, I know how to do this. I'm going to write out x plus 13 times x plus 13, because I'm squaring everything in parentheses, and that's going to equal 507. And then I'm going to FOIL this out because I'm a good little student. So I'm going to get x squared plus 26x plus whatever that is. I think it's 169. Let's just see. 13 squared is, yep, 13 squared is 169 equals 507. And then I say, okay, now I have to subtract 507 from each side. And so I get x squared plus 26x minus something, minus 338 equals 0. And now that's a quadratic equation, and I can't just factor it, so I'm going to have to use the quadratic formula, which is negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a, and then I'm going to plug in those numbers, and I'm going to crunch everything out, and before I get to the end of the problem, I hate math again, and I vow to become an artist of some sort so that I never have to do this type of math again. So that's one possible way to solve the problem. But we are going to use the square root property to solve it a different way. So I'm going to say x plus 13 quantity squared equals 507. And this time, I'm going to take the square root of both sides, remembering to put my plus or minus in front of the square root sign because I want to consider negative numbers. I mean, I don't know that I'm dealing with distance or sheep or time, so I am going to want to think about negative numbers. So then that gives me x plus 13 equals plus or minus the square root of 507. And then I subtract 13 from each side. So I get x equals negative 13 plus or minus the square root of 507. And that is my answer. Look at how much easier this is than this over here. I mean, this, I bailed. I didn't even fill in the numbers for my variables A, B, and C, and I didn't crunch through. If I had, I would have come up with this number, or this answer. So by using the square root property, we can bypass this quadratic formula. So that is why we are learning the square root property. It doesn't help us with every single problem that we have, but anytime we have a square like that, that's what we can use.